Hello, and welcome to NoCab Game Design. In this episode, we discuss the 9th level of Halo Combat Evolved, titled Keys. Here, the Master Chief returns to the alien ship, Truth and Reconciliation, but this time, it's overrun with the Flood. The level starts out with a piece of environmental storytelling, this armless combat form chasing a panicking grunt. As discussed previously in episode 6, this is a form of dynamic storytelling, but here, the devs are using it to pull a player into the game, right this way to the combat. In this encounter, the grunts are slowly overrun with more Flood, but notice the very first combat form that attacks is holding a shotgun. Also from level 6, we know the shotgun is the weapon of choice against the Flood, and is quite dangerous when used against the Master Chief. I've played this level several times, and this Flood always brings a shotgun, and always focuses on the grunts. In this way, the developers are providing a powerful tool to the player, but they are also changing the delivery method. This is fresh and much more engaging than simply spawning the player with it or putting it on the floor like in previous levels. It makes the player feel a little more accomplished, self-reliant, and alert. Around the corner, the player is faced with a dead end, a hole blown into the ship. Cortana makes the recommendation
We should continue our search somewhere else.
to find another way around. But as the player turns back, they're presented with a familiar problem: infinite Flood spawns. Again, I touched briefly on infinite spawns back in level 6. There, only the small infection class forms spawn forever, and the devs use the technique to push the player back onto the main path. Here, in level 9, the combat forms now spawn, but the devs still use it as a push force, coercing the player back onto the main path. Cortana eventually changes her mind and tells the Chief to jump into the pools of glowing coolant below. From a game design perspective, that's risky. It may be informal, but Cortana did give the player a mission: find another way around. This is a common quest in games, and some players will expect there to, in fact, be another way around. Some players will quickly run back to the other side of the infinite spawn and get stuck on the wrong side. Some will focus on shooting and not realize that Cortana has changed her mind. Simply put, players don't like it when their momentum is disrupted. Telling a player to turn back only to change your mind is turbulent and chaotic. Now, to be fair, this is a turbulent and chaotic encounter. Perhaps this was the design goal, which in that case, good job. But it's important here, notice, it took Cortana about 60 seconds to change her mind, and every 20 seconds or so, she warns the player. Threat level rising, or the coolant looks good right about now. The Halo devs knew that this was risky and attempted to mitigate the risk with frequent voice lines and an endless way for the Flood to push the player back. So what's the lesson here? In your games, sometimes you may want to add a sense of chaos and confusion to an encounter. Forcing a player to turn around is a technique that will help achieve this, but it's risky. Turning back is frustrating and disrupts the gameplay flow. But the Halo devs here only hold the player for about 1 minute in this limbo, and use a lot of voice lines and infinite spawns to push the player back towards the main path. Later in the level, the player gets back onto the ship and is faced with another infinite spawn. But this time, the spawn point is in front of the player and not behind. Here, the player is stuck, the new Flood regularly falling in front of them, preventing forward progress. Notice these small hallways prevent a player from seeing what's ahead of them. To progress, the player will have to take a risk and run through into the unknown. Additionally, the player will always be flanked in this encounter. It's uncomfortable, but that is the experience that the developers have built out for the player. And we can't forget about the spawn point. There is an endless push of Flood, forcing the player deeper into the ship and into the unknown. This is a very potent encounter. Challenging, yes, but memorable for sure. The infinite spawn isn't the only tools that the devs use to harass the player. In this level, the devs also set up a few ambushes. Watch the minimap in this example. It's a little hard to see, but the red enemy indicators will suddenly pop up as soon as the Master Chief rounds the corner. These Flood suddenly spawn, emerging from the ooze, and quickly kill the player. And even if the player survives the initial surprise, more keep spawning and the ambush continues. So, to summarize, in this level, the developers used the Flood in two main techniques. First, an infinite spawn will push a player deeper into the level, usually into an unknown or some uncomfortable situation. This can be placed in front of the player for an extra challenge. The second technique An ambush point can be set to suddenly surround a player. While this does increase the challenge of the level, it is, of course, unfair to a first-time player. So the checkpoint is typically right before or nearby the ambush.
But while the ambush is a little unfair, there is a powerful countermeasure that the player has access to: the shotgun. In fact, to me, it feels that this entire level was built for the shotgun. The shotgun is good here for two reasons. First, it's just good against the Flood, who don't have any energy shielding effects. But the shotgun is also most effective at close range, and this level features short, narrow hallways with tight corners. As the player turns, they're suddenly up close and personal with the Flood. Even the outdoor sections take place in these steep ravines, which box the player in. The level architecture here is in contrast to level 3, the nighttime sniper rifle level. In that level, the architecture was designed to promote the usage of the sniper rifle with large open battlefields. But here, in level 9, this level is clearly designed to promote the usage of a shotgun, a very, very different design goal. Now, don't get me wrong, this level also has a sniper encounter, which gives the player the distant high grounds and an open battlefield to oversee. But this one encounter stands more as an accent or a palate cleanser for the rest of the level. A few minutes of something different to break up the cramped, fast-paced combat of the rest of the level. The majority of the level architecture features cramped, short hallways, which force the player to be close to the enemies, and this is further exacerbated with the use of scripted ambushes and endless spawn points, which push the player through the level into the unknown and uncomfortable encounters. Additionally, the Flood themselves are effective melee units, making it dangerous for the player to be so close. The player will need to make a series of snap turns and dispatch threats from in front, behind, and sometimes even above. The shotgun is a natural choice here because of its high damage, bullet spread, making it easy to aim, and effectiveness versus the shieldless Flood, which are featured prominently in this level. But it does make me wonder, which came first, the weapon or the level? Now, in the previous episode, I discussed that an effective technique for content generation is to build encounters based around a unique tool or toy given to the player. That same principle can apply the other way around, too. Instead of building an encounter based on the tool, a developer can build a tool for a given encounter. So, which came first, the chicken or the egg? We can never know, unless the developers themselves come out and tell us. But it's sometimes fun to speculate. What do you think? Which was developed first? Did the designers create a shotgun and then decide to build an ambush-filled close combat level featuring zombies? Or did the level come first, and the developers realize that they need a new tool to help the player get through the challenge? My gut tells me that the shotgun came first, and they built a level around it. But that's just my personal design style and bias. For me, encounters flow from the affordances offered to the players. But I also know some developers who are creative in the other way, developing challenges first, and then only adding tools if they need to. What is your creative style? How do you come up with content for your games? Let me know down in the comments. I typically try to focus on the positive elements during my analysis and talk about what the developers did well. But learning from others' mistakes is valuable too, so I want to take a moment and talk about a fairly major game design sin. Never take a toy away from a player, or at least be very careful and have a very good reason to do so. Notice here, the developers placed a ghost in the middle of this level. Now, I wish I could use it, but I can't. It's just a dead prop. A player will see this from a distance and start imagining, how cool would it be if I could play with this ghost? When a player sees a ghost, they expect to be able to use it, and when that expectation is disappointed, the gameplay suddenly becomes disappointing too. The moment of enjoyment is lost and becomes a moment of frustration. The player can imagine themselves gliding through the halls and running over enemies. Now, maybe it's a bad idea, but it is still an idea that a player will at least want to attempt. The player wants to play with their toys. It's in their name, it's what they do. Now, of course, you as a developer can decide if the ghost will be good or bad here. Will there be a lot of exploding carrier-class Flood in narrow hallways to ruin the ghost? Or will there be large, straight rooms filled with distracted enemies making easy targets? Now, setting up a player to fail is also a design mistake. My recommendation here specifically, the devs should have just removed the ghost from this room and avoid this problem altogether. But generally speaking, once you introduce a toy, mechanic, or ability to a player, you cannot take it away. Otherwise, the player will get frustrated that their expectations were not met and their play disrupted. The last topic I want to talk about here is the waypoint. Previously, I talked about waypoints back in level 3, where the devs place a waypoint right on the doorway after combat encounters to give the player the immediate next step to take. But this is level 9, and things have changed. Instead of giving the player the exact next step to take, the developers place the waypoint some way off in the distance. There is no straight line path to get there either. It's not clear how the player should get from point A to point B. The developers are saying, you're on level 9, you're almost done with the game. You should be able to explore on your own, and you don't need us to hold your hand the entire way. This is a challenge increase, yes, albeit a relatively small one. This style of waypoint, marking a distant target and forcing a player to figure out their own way there, it changes the nature of the gameplay slightly. Here, the player must explore on their own and make decisions about how to get there. It exposes a player to the risk of becoming lost or going the wrong way. Now, yes, this level consists of mostly linear hallways, but there are some forks in the path and a few room-based combat encounters which will turn a player around and disrupt their sense of direction. Notice here, should the player go to the right or the left? Previously in level 3, the waypoint would be placed on the correct door, but now the marker is off in the distance somewhere. It's unclear where to go. The developers still employ the tried and true signal of enemy presence to denote forward progress, but ultimately the player has to explore on their own. And this is good game design. The player should be able to explore on their own by this point. It's level 9. If the developers continued to put waypoint indicators on every single door or pathway, a player may feel belittled or frustrated that the developers are removing the sense of exploration. According to flow theory, a game's challenge should grow in proportion to a player's skills. This means more than just the enemies should get tougher in the last few levels. No, even the act of walking through the map should increase in challenge. Now, determining exactly how much or how quickly this challenge should scale takes practice and will vary based on the game. But we can see what the Halo developers did, and we can see this through the waypoints. Early in the game, the developers deployed a waypoint after every single encounter. Now, there are about 3 to 5 encounters between waypoints, so that's about a 4 times increase in quote-unquote challenge across 6 levels. Not to mention that this is a dark, maze-like level, which of course bumps up the challenge quite a bit too. The main point that I'm trying to make here is that as a player's skill grows, they'll demand more and more challenging or complicated ways to use that skill, even if the skill is simply walking through the level and deciding where to go. That's it for this level. I recently got a new microphone and have been trying out some new audio post-processing software. I'm still working out some of the kinks, so I hope you'll forgive me for the audio quality variation in this episode. Next episode, the Master Chief returns to the Pillar of Autumn. There, in the last level of the game, the developers take what I consider to be one of the biggest risks in game design history, and it ultimately pays off. I'll see you there.
The explosion should damage enough systems below it to destroy the ring.